What's up, everybody? This is Tommy Runs, and this is the Run, Eat, Sleep Show, episode number 85. Today, I have a very special guest on the show. I have Alison Désir on the show, and I feel like I know her a lot. Like I know a lot about her at this point. She just dropped a book. I feel like I've been watching her and admiring what she's been doing from afar, but I'm very excited to have her on the show. Yeah, so I'm kind of nervous a little bit because like she's like a superstar right now. So let me bring her to the front so you can see her. But just a really quick introduction. If you don't know who Alison Désir is, she's a mother, disruptor, fearless leader, aka Powder's Feet, founder of Harlem Run, a rock star, and author of Running While Black that just came out like a few days ago. It seems like. But it's been everywhere. If you have not seen the cover of this book, at least, just means you haven't been on social media for the last week or two. Welcome to the show, Alison Désir. I am super. I've been nervous before, in life. I've probably been nervous maybe on the show, maybe 5, 6 times, maybe. And I am like stumped on like I'm thinking of all like the cool things we could talk about. But I just number one, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We're here. Where is here right now? Because you are on a, a world tour.
Yes,
Um,
I
so
am
where are you
currently,
now?
yeah, I'm home. So I live outside of Seattle
Okay.
and I'm here. I got here, I got here Saturday night and I leave again Thursday. So
Okay.
brief stint. I've got a few events here and then I'm back on the road.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because you have like a very busy schedule right now.
Yeah.
You're literally everywhere.
Yes.
You'll be in New York, right?
Yes. I'll be in
So
New York for the
for
So
the
for
marathon.
Thursday, I go to Boston. Then I go to New York for the marathon. Then I come to you in Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then California, Austin, Texas. So all around.
Man, the frequent flyer miles are just going nuts right now, and
Yes,
I'm sure you guys will appreciate this once you can sit back, relax, and then use it. You take advantage of all these miles.
exactly. That's the dream.
Yeah, yeah. So I honestly, I'm not done with the book. I think I have like a couple chapters left, or maybe one. I think I have 2 chapters left total.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm just like number one, the editor or whoever was was trying to talk you into doing an audiobook was right. Your voice
Yeah.
is like butter, so just don't worry about that
Thank
anymore, and I'm
you.
sure you get plenty of compliments on that. But it's it's like one of those books that let me ramble for a second.
Yeah.
So I listened to Ta-Nehisi Coates' book for
Mm,
Between the World and Me in 2020. So it was like one of those like life kind of changing or shaping moments for me. I mean, because
mm,
I obviously was aware of all of this,
mhm,
obviously, but I just hadn't heard it put like in the way that he did,
mm,
and so it really changed like how I looked at myself in this world
mm,
in a way. Even though my grandmother and mother have been telling me these things, but in a much more loving,
mm,
nurturing way to try to guide me into like not hating anything or people or the system or whatever. But it was just so perfect the way that he wrote it, and it was like about his life, but it was also about what's happening. So
mhm,
listening to your book, it felt so similar in that aspect where it was like about you, but
mm,
it was so me at the same time, and so
mhm,
many others that like even if we had none of the same exact experiences,
mm,
everything you said was like reminded me of the same feeling that I felt of like of
mm,
anger and fear and pride,
mm.
um, all wrapped in this like weird feeling of like happy, like I don't know what to do, like while listening to it.
Well,
Um,
this is high praise. You just compared me to Ta-Nehisi Coates, and then you said that you could relate to my experience. That makes my day because that's exactly what I set out to accomplish by being so vulnerable, right? Like it
yeah,
was a risk to put myself out there and share my experiences, but I knew that other folks like you would connect and get to see themselves in a book about running, which we
mhm.
haven't ever had a book like this that centered us.
No, absolutely, and it's just like so neat. I mean, because we've had 2020 was like that year that it seemed like all brands
Mm,
woke up, and I didn't necessarily know that you were very much so part of that, and I appreciate the work that you did that year and since. But it seemed like the industry woke up and said, hey, we need to figure something out. Um, and what is like what was 2020 like for you? I mean, I know you talk about a lot about it in the book, but like what was 2020 like for you? Because for so many black folks, it was like it was like a year of like an awakening as well, even though we knew all the things that were happening.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, 2020 was uh, the biggest word that I'll use is disorienting for me. So I
Mhm.
had just had a son in 2019 in July. So I was a new mother. I was struggling with postpartum depression and anxiety. And, as we're all home during this period from March on and learning about what happened to Ahmaud Arbery,
Yeah.
and really for the first time, like, of course, I've been a Black woman my whole life. I've had partners who are men, Black men. And so I've always had that fear of what could happen to me or what could happen to somebody that I loved. But it wasn't until having my son and realizing, like, wow, I really could lose my son in this world. Like, this son is not, I mean, this world is not built for him. And it felt like it was only a matter of time till something would happen to him.
Yeah.
On top of that, recognizing that the running industry was not talking about this murder, nobody seemed to know that it had happened, despite the fact that the industry at the time was talking a lot about quote unquote runner safety. All of the attention was given to white women. There were several Runners World covers and articles that addressed it from the perspective of white women, and I had I really reached my breaking point when I finally wrote this op-ed, which sort of led to the change in the industry, because I felt helpless, angry, like I mentioned, disoriented, um, and was grasping for anything that I could do to sort of feel empowered. And that op-ed, well, first commenting on social media and bringing attention to the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, and then writing that op-ed totally changed the trajectory of how I thought the year would look. I suddenly had all of this work to do, right? The industry was like, oh, we
Yeah.
need to change it. How about you lead the way? Which
Yeah.
was not my intention at all. But it made for a really impactful year.
Okay, and then so I'm just gonna go all over the place because
Yeah.
like I sat here, it honestly was like which way do I go with this interview? But to know to for you to be in the position that you were in 2020, to be able to take what happened and so eloquently speak about it, but then to be able to work with brands
Mm,
and help push it forward and make sure that it was honest and true. Um, I have a 15-year-old daughter,
mm.
and
I
I'm
didn't know that.
oh, okay, yeah. So 15-year-old daughter, 12-year-old son.
Mm,
And so my question, I guess, is what like about the way that your parents raised you and the things that they instilled in you what do you attribute the fact that you were ready for like this moment, even
mm,
though you were dealing with postpartum depression, to be ready in 2020 to do something that is this big?
mhm. Yeah, I have to. I mean, my parents, now we're both parents, and I can say for certain I have no idea what I'm doing.
I
But my
no idea, no idea. Somebody asked me for tips on how to raise a teenager. I'm like, I don't know.
yeah, day by day, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But my parents somehow knew that the most important thing they could do for me was create a home where I was loved, I was cared for, and where history was a part of every single conversation. And so what that looked like was, my parents taught me to be skeptical of what I read in books,
Mhm.
taught me grounded me in a sense that Black people, our history, our creativity has been essential in this country, despite what people will tell me outside of the home. So I was going to very white schools. I was in very white environments where Black people were never mentioned or were only mentioned in connection to slavery or other struggles. And my parents were talking about how powerful Black people are, what our contributions are. There was artwork by Black people. There was music that we were listening to. So they created this space where I had a deep sense of belonging and power within the home that allowed me to then take chances when I was in white spaces, being disruptive and sharing some of this information, looking for opportunities to question my teachers and authority, right? So all of this, when people ask me like, oh, how long have you been working on your book? I say 2 years, but
Mhm.
also my whole lifetime, right? Because the book is me sharing all of the ways that I learned to disrupt spaces, to be authentically myself, which prepared me for, in 2020 and beyond, having the platform and privilege to be able to speak to brands, events, retailers, and make it clear to them that the industry they thought they were making, one that is open to everybody, and that all you need are sneakers, that democratic ideal that running likes to say, we're not there yet, right?
Mhm.
So I thank my parents for giving me the models and the practice and the support to, you know, feel confident enough to speak my mind.
And so in you started just to kind of like get like back to like the running thing, because when I when I thought about like diversity in running or diversity in the space in inclusion, I always kind of leaned towards like in the thinking of it towards more black folks on the start line, which is very, very important.
Mhm.
But then at the same time, there's a part missing that I feel like you starting like a Harlem Run, what was it called? Powder Feet Run Club in the
Yeah.
beginning. I like Harlem Run better, just I
I
think
mean,
I think
yes,
it's
it
good.
made all the difference. You'll see in my book when I changed the name, people finally started coming. So
Yeah,
you're
yeah. We're like, "Oh, okay, so we don't have to," like, it makes more sense. I thought we're doing powdered donuts, whatever, but, but, like, for you to start Harlem Run and along with other, Black folks that had run clubs at the time, but that I think that is it was so important
Mhm.
did you starting Harlem Run and having that success kind of put you in, like, the right mindset to be able to go forward with, not just the book, but just the work that you've done since
Yeah.
2020.
Absolutely. I mean, I think my life has really been an accumulation of building up that confidence and strength. Like I say that, we as runners, we know that training for a marathon, it's not that it gets easier, it's that we get stronger, right?
Mhm,
And so that has really been the story of my life in terms of getting confidence in my voice, getting in my confidence to lead and build community. So Harlem Run, when I started Harlem Run, which initially was Powdered Feet Run Club, I showed up for 6 months by myself every Monday, waiting for people to show up, posting on social media, going to different run clubs, and getting no support. And then little by little, people started seeing what I was doing and believing what I was doing, and I started to build this community. And as Harlem Run grew, or as I grew personally, Harlem Run also grew. So
mhm,
I started to learn, for example, the importance of transformational leadership versus transactional leadership, right? Like the idea that part of my role was finding other people who would eventually take over this community, right? That the community was bigger than just about me. It was about these values and creating a space of belonging. Then I went on to learn that, wow, with that community, I could attempt really difficult things, whether that be fundraising $100,000 for an organization or running 250 miles with that community. Right? I just started to see Harlem Run really was almost like an education for me
mhm.
in putting together the pieces, along with the pieces that my parents first started with me in the home. All of that has been part of this journey, and that's why I wanted to tell all of this in the book, right? Because I think, not I think, I know that oftentimes we look at people who we admire and we think that they never struggled, or they
Right.
always had it together, or somehow it was destined to be. And in truth, I didn't know before I started running long distance, I didn't know if I would still be on this earth, right? I was very depressed and actively harming myself. So I wanted to really be clear that each of us has the power to do something, right? And my story can be an example of that.
And yeah, and I felt that like through and through in the book. I mean, because we've all I love where how you said that, like how there's so many people that we look at as
Mhm.
superstars, or we put on this pedestal, that seemingly have it all figured out at the moment.
Exactly.
And
They seems they have perfect lives on their
yeah,
little
yeah,
Instagrams.
yeah. And then it's like until you see Jay-Z and Beyonce in the elevator, like then it's like,
I
then you realize like, oh, okay. But no, honestly though, it's like you put people on a pedestal, and number one is it was amazing to hear the things that you've gone through in your life, and but then to know that like it's still like it's always a work in progress. I mean, it's
That's
always
it.
like it's like running at the highest level. Like there's marathons hurt, like no matter who you are. And I
Exactly.
I like that your book kind of exposed that process, but then also that it's an ever going process.
Yeah, because another part of this, particularly in the wake of 2020, is that brands, events, people, everybody wants to get it right, right? So
Hmm.
everybody's consumed with like, how do we do the right thing, say the right thing? And in truth, like that's always changing. And this idea of racial equity is really hard, and we'll
Yeah,
never get it exactly right. So I think part of what we need to focus on is, rather than getting it right, is developing the endurance to keep trying, and the curiosity to keep learning, right?
yeah,
Because again, with all these ways that it relates to running, like you need to be able to stick with it when things get difficult. When it seems like you can't go on, you got to
yeah.
catch that second wind. And I just think that hopefully this clarifies what the experience of striving for something very difficult like racial equity, what it really looks like.
And like every time you say something, I got like five, like I write down five things to say, and then you say something else, and I'm like, well, that's out the window. So I guess like look, let me try to control this, okay, Allison.
All right,
let me get it
I'm gonna
together.
take a step
Let me
back.
get it together, right? No, but like so what why did you write the book? Like
Yeah.
what was the moment where you're like, I have to do this?
It was honestly after that op-ed. So I wrote the op-ed, and in it I said several things about, well, one, I said this idea of this fear that I have for my son, right? Like having a black boy in this world, a world that really just seeks to destroy him. That was one piece of it. Then I spoke about the racial divide in running, that there are white running groups and there are black running groups, and rarely is there overlap.
Mhm,
Um, and in response to the things that I was saying, white people were completely shocked for the most part. White people had no idea that running could feel different for somebody in a black body, had no idea that black and white people in many ways live in different worlds, right?
mhm,
And then on the other hand, black people and other marginalized people were like, thank you for finally putting this into words.
yeah,
Like, this is how I feel. I feel the beauty and joy and transformation of running, but I also feel the fear and the otherness and the lack of representation.
yeah,
And I realized, I started thinking, like, there is no book that tells this experience. Like, there are lots of wonderful running books. There are very few written by black people, even fewer written by black women. Honestly, if I think about it offhand, I think it's myself and Myrna Valerio. And I decided, well, just like everything else in my life, when I realized that there was an opportunity or something that needs to be done, I did it, right? And I started thinking about, well, what story could I tell, and how could I pull all of these threads together, like this very personal narrative, this history that talks about hidden figures in our sport that actually built the
yeah.
sport, and then with a call to action, right? Because I want people to finish my book and feel like they can't even sit in their chair, like they have to get up
Mhm.
and do something.
Yeah, I had to like pause at one point. I'm like, okay,
Mm.
I can't be mad in my kitchen right now. I gotta figure this out. And I think I like that, the different worlds part of it
Mm,
it's like it is somewhat shocking to hear, like one of your experiences, you went to a club or a fitness group,
mm.
that was very outward loud and like boisterous and doing their thing.
At
Um
6:30 in the morning at the mayor's house.
6:30 in the morning at the mayor's house, and just how like comfortable they seemed to feel doing it, and then how like immediately black folks, or any minority for that matter, for sure, but black folks was like, yo, that's not even a possibility. And
Exactly.
if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna make sure I'm looking around to see what else is happening around us.
Exactly.
Because I think I was talking to some guys not too long ago about like the New York running culture and
Mhm.
like those races that they do, like unsanctioned races, and they're like cutting through yards and jumping through things
Mhm.
and breaking into like not breaking it, well, breaking into buildings. I'm like,
Breaking
yeah,
into IKEA, yeah.
yeah, and like
Laying
using
across
that as
the
a
floor.
as a shortcut to get to wherever and jumping fence. And then I'm like, I'm listening, like, wow, that's really cool. I know people that did that without without it being a sanctioned race, but it's like I could never hearing it. Was anxious just because like I would never feel like I could do that. And
Mhm.
when people when white folks hear that we have to think of this whole thing so much different,
Yeah,
and it's terrible, and it sucks that it's like everything we do, especially in an outward world, we have to approach it with some type of fear or caution,
right.
when in that experience in itself changes the whole dynamic. And that's why it's so important for groups like Harlem Run and other groups that have been born in the last few years, for sure,
Yeah.
to make Black folks or any group that is not that group or the it group, feel comfortable to know that this is also their thing, but we're just going to do it the way we do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, I had I know all of the examples that you've given, and I had a conversation with Peter Bromka. He posted something on his social media just about the fact that sometimes he'll be on a run and he'll see that a sign says no trespassing,
Right
but he'll
there.
decide that he wants to go anyway because he's curious, and it'll be like the most beautiful run. And that through my work, he realized just how much of a privilege that is. And
Hmm.
that's the thing about privilege, right? Like privilege prevents us from seeing it because we take it for granted. So in my case, I always make the example talking about I'm able-bodied, right? And so I take for granted the fact that, for example, in my house, there's 2 sets of stairs. I host events that are often on a second floor of a running store, and there are no elevators. I don't think much about space or accommodations. If you think about folks who might be deaf, there are no captions on this, right? There are a lot of things because of my ability privilege that I don't take for granted, or that I do take for granted, but people without that privilege are completely boxed out of the space. And so this awareness, this recognition that the world assigns privilege and that defines our experiences allows us to then think about, okay, well, how can we do a better job of accommodating, welcoming people, of getting access to those resources? And sometimes the answer to those questions are difficult, right? Sometimes it means like a lot of funding, or it means learning ASL sign language, right? Like sometimes the what it requires is difficult, but just that level of awareness and understanding that we all have different lived experiences because of systems of
Right.
oppression is essential.
Yeah, and it's like it's about acknowledgement, like it's because when you mentioned that if for this there's no captions like live captions at the moment, but the it's everyone will acknowledge that someone that is deaf can't, like if I'm not speaking clearly enough, they can't read my lips,
Right,
and obviously captions are needed,
right.
but when it comes to this black white thing, it's like, well, like it's always it's
Are you sure about that?
well, I
Like,
mean, could it
maybe
be
maybe you
because
just misinterpret it.
yeah.
Maybe you were just a little aggressive.
Oh, don't yeah, aggressive. I'll never
It was your
say
tone. It
Allison
was
is
your
aggressive.
tone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Are you sure that you went about this the right way? I mean, and then honestly, like, and I think that it's so ingrained, and I think that I like the part you talked about, white supremacy is it's like we live and breathe in it, and to the point where you had to like try to teach yourself or like relearn to not go how we go. I mean, because I know that I'm not victim of it, but I have to probably over the last few years I've been trying to figure out ways to not lean in the direction that I feel like is normal.
Right,
And like that aggression, like that, well, maybe it was my tone, or maybe I asked for too
right,
much, or
right,
maybe, talking to a friend, like, well, are you sure you tried to do it the right way? And
right.
it's just so ingrained and natural for me to like try to figure out a way to get, I guess, what I want in all these situations.
Right.
So we
Right.
have to go a different route than maybe someone else does. And I have to make sure that I remember that that is a form of the structure that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing, right? Like white supremacy affects everybody, including white people. White people benefit from white supremacy and a centering of whiteness, but they're still harmed, right? And I think about, for example, like think about our hair, right? Like we both have locks, yours is free form, like, and I think about growing up, how I would never have done my hair like this,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I would have looked at your hair and thought that it was disheveled, right?
Hmm.
Or like, "Wow, you really should comb your hair, Tommy,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is because I had and like still have to resist these ideas that the way that our hair naturally comes out of our head, that there's something wrong with it,
Hmm.
right? And the more like because you get that message every day about what it means to be professional, about tying your hair back and things looking well done, right? And all of that is are these ideals that really don't have us in mind.
Hmm.
So part of my journey in the book is talking about how I have to rid myself of my own white supremacist ideas, of my ideas that I'm not beautiful, that I'm not good enough, that I have to be a certain size, that I have to talk a certain way, right?
Yeah.
All of that is part of was part of my journey to becoming my authentic self. And as I said, I still struggle, right? Like there are days when I think I wish I were this or that or whatever the message is that I'm receiving in the media. And I have to remind myself, like, those messages don't serve me. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the hair because, like, in 2020 was like the year when I stopped. This last time I cut my hair, and it was like the pandemic happened at like at the perfect time for me, and I think and a lot of other Black folks because it slowed the world down enough for us to actually see, and not just push off the things that were happening that
Mm,
had happened a thousand or thousands of times before. And that was like the year I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna, grow my hair. Like, and we're all stuck in the house anyway, whatever.
mhm,
But then as I got more and realized that, number one, we could all die from COVID at any moment. But then also at the same time, as a as me Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and all these things that were happening, um, I was like, I want to be the best version of me possible.
mm,
And for me at that moment meant like embracing, who I was as a Black father,
mm,
and a Black man in this country.
mm,
And it's always been like, make sure like I used to see people at work conferences 'cause I'm like I work in the professional like the relocation industry and field. Um I used to see, like young Black dudes coming is all white pretty much, but I used to see like
mm,
like sometimes like a Black guy would come into the space new and have like, have locks of some sort or something that was different or a fro or whatever. And I would look at it like, bro, you're
mm,
not gonna last too long, like you need to figure it
mm,
out. Um,
mm,
and and that might have been true, like
mm.
because of the situation that we're
Right.
in, but that doesn't make it right.
Okay.
And yeah, it doesn't make it okay at all. And
Mhm,
so yeah, thanks for acknowledging that because it is I'd never felt like I could do this. Like I
mhm,
would maybe grow my hair a little bit before a conference
mhm,
though, or before I was seen.
mhm,
I'd cut it off to make sure
mhm.
that I didn't pose a threat. I didn't look like I
Exactly.
was, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing, like, our hair is political because it's been politicized, right? Like
Mhm,
there literally had to be the Crown Act, which forbids discrimination based on hair in professional environments. So when I'm talking to people in the running industry and we're talking about hiring and retention, and I
mhm,
see job descriptions that say must be professional, I'm like, do you know what that means to somebody like me? That is sending a message to me that I can't show up as my authentic self because these ideas of professionalism are rooted in whiteness and white supremacy,
mhm,
right? Um, so yeah, I mean, it will continue to blow my mind just um, how different our two worlds are. Like living in a Black world, we need to know the rules for our world and for their world.
mhm.
And white people don't even know that there's another world.
Right.
They just think it's their world.
Yeah. Yeah, and that and sadly, we have to we like you mentioned uh, all Black parents like have to
Mm,
feel like we do a thing where we make sure like my daughter doesn't even drive yet, or you know, and my son's definitely not driving anywhere anytime soon. 12 years old, he's got some time. But like that conversation of like just come home, you know, like I've no matter what happens, like do what you have to do to come home.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine like that not all families have to have that conversation of
No.
just come home, like do exactly what it is that you need to do, be play yourself down as much as you need
Ex
to in that moment.
exactly.
You can argue later. And
Exactly.
like Ahmaud Arbery and was a perfect example of like that conversation that we have to have with our kids, which is just like it's just disheartening in every way, shape, or form.
I think about that all the time. My son is 3, and so it's like he's very he's very young, but I wanna teach him to be confident, but I also want him to know that, as you said, like, you do what it takes. If you don't respond to a police officer, you don't do anything that would make them want to kill you, which is bizarre, right?
Mhm,
Because you cannot make somebody want to kill you. But this is how we can best take care of our children. And that reminds me of Ta-Nehisi Coates, right? That's what's so painful and beautiful about what he writes, the love that you have for your children,
mm,
but that is so wrapped up in how society, how the world is trying to kill us.
yeah. So I got some comments too. Like, first I have to shut up. So this is my mom. She said, "Just come home." Cries.
Oh.
Um, and so and so T. Davis brings up a good point that it feels like you have to adapt to their liking in order to get
Mhm.
accepted within the run influencer community. But the problem is they don't understand our culture or what our people want from our influencers.
I
Go ahead.
love this. I want to dive into this because I think so part of what I talk about in my book is one that we have to reshape the running industry. Um, that's it's important for white folks in power to create space for us. And at the same time, we are going to create our own spaces, right? Whether
Mhm,
it's running clubs and crews like Harlem Run or Pioneers, whether it's clothing companies like Pioneers and Actively Black, whether it's magazines like Mid Strike Magazine. I think what's really powerful about the time that we're in is that demographics are shifting. And
mhm,
by I think by 2040, 2050, white people will no longer be in the majority.
mhm,
What that means is who is buying the stuff, who is well, we're already setting trends. We already set the trends, but who has the purchasing power? That's us, right?
mhm,
I read this recently, the outdoor industry report, and essentially it said that if non-white groups don't start recreating more in the outdoors, the industry is headed for decline. So the
mm,
power is shifting in our hands, and it's about yeah, when if brands or events don't recognize our value to influence, then we start creating our own industries and
mhm,
spaces that will value us, and they'll come running, right?
mhm,
Like I was talking to one of the to the founder of to Jesse from Mid Strike, and I was like, just know, I hope you know how powerful what you're doing is,
mhm,
right? And he's like, I do, and he's taking it slow. He doesn't want to go too fast or get into any partnerships because you know things could get diluted. But this just came from him recognizing they don't see us, but
yeah,
I can do my own thing.
yeah.
So it's we're doing two things at the same time. We're demanding space within the existing industry, and then we're creating our own space that celebrates and centers us.
And that kind of was like perfect like segue into this that I feel like as I was listening to the book, I'm like, this is because I mean you referenced like the work that was done like with RIDC and
Mhm.
in a lot of the call to action that happened in 2020, 2021. And it seemed like from the outside looking in as like a as a consumer looking at it, it was like a an attention grab or
Mm,
I feel like it was rooted some of it was rooted in like the right, you know, thing in the way to go and like you know, Between the World and Me came out at a really perfect time, you know,
mm,
like to capitalize on all that was happening. And then
mm,
I thought about the placement and like the timing of your book. And I'm like, I feel like it's so perfect for
mm,
the running industry because there in 2020, it was like you could 2021 for sure, black people everywhere.
mm,
And it was like this big push. Um, and I feel like it's still much better, obviously, than it was before 2020. But it feel like because a lot of the brands that maybe had some good intentions or maybe didn't have the best intentions, but was using that movement or that momentum to capitalize, now you only have a few companies that are kind of doing it right. And I feel like
Mhm,
your book is a perfect timing to like refocus, like, hey, what were we doing? What's
mhm.
important? What's going forward? So do you feel like this is a good time for the book?
Absolutely. I to your point, this is like, hey, guess what?
It's still here.
We're still here
Yeah.
and there's still accountability. I mean, I enjoyed having a little moment on Instagram where we were talking about UTMB, for example, right?
Hmm.
This event that is in Mont Blanc in France, this very prestigious event. This year, there was unprecedented amount of money and coverage poured into the event. And yet, when you look at who was racing, there were very few Black people, if any. I don't know if there were Black people racing, but not just
Um,
that, who was behind the scenes? Who were the camera people? Who were in charge of logistics? Who was in charge of media, right?
mhm,
And you think of, this is the way that we want to hold brands accountable. Like you say all the right things, you create beautiful marketing and messaging that includes representation, but then what does your talent look like and what does your workforce look like, right?
mhm.
So I think that this book is definitely well timed as a reminder, and I hope it continues the conversation and that other people feel inspired by my book to tell their story, right?
And
I
I think,
hope there are
I'm sorry.
many more books that come from this.
And I think that, sorry to interject, but I think
Yeah.
that it's great because it's not just necessarily, it's not just it's pointing out and putting a spotlight on the things that were wrong, are wrong, and still continue to go the wrong direction, or at least using past examples that we still see today. So it's not like it's like, oh, that was, in the 60s and that doesn't happen anymore. It's like it's like, no, it was like last year. But but it's like, I feel like it has some really good call to actions, and the stories told, you can learn from, no matter if you're open, if you're listening, and you're okay, and you're okay, not too fragile to like hear the point. It's not saying you are anything. It's like it's this thing that we're in, and
Yes.
the fact that you talked about you having to own your part in kind of perpetuating
Mm,
that narrative. um it challenged me in moments. I'm like, oh, okay, like, so this isn't just about like about
mm,
white people. This is about
mm,
the whole system and everybody included in it. And
mhm.
I just appreciated the fact that it didn't just seem like this is a call to action. This is like a what's next,
Yeah.
how are we doing it, where are we going.
Yeah, one of somebody mentioned about the importance of vulnerability in here, and I've been talking about it, but showing my being vulnerable invites other people to be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't have all the answers. In fact, what I know is that I know less. Every time I think I know something, I realize just how little I know, right?
Mhm.
So the goal is not that we all leave this feeling like we'll always get things right. It's that, as I mentioned, we'll be curious, we'll keep trying, we'll recognize when we make mistakes, but that we'll always be taking action, right?
Mhm.
It's pontificating and taking trainings, like the time that's over, right? We're not just going to sit in DEI trainings for the rest of our life. We actually have to putting these practices into action and embedding them into the system so that when Chris from Gazelle Sports, who's an awesome guy and
So
believes
funny.
in this work. When Chris leaves, guess what? The system has already been shifted so
Yeah.
that it's going to move towards equity with or without him.
Yeah.
This work can't rely on a nice guy who's interested in this, right?
Yeah.
It has to be about shifting the entire system so that it continues to work differently.
Yeah, I was just gonna bring that up because after you were talking about, when you're talking about UTMB, and the first person that like talked to me about the fact that it's not just about getting black runners out there, which is great and needed, for health and just in all types of reasons, obviously. But Chris from Gazelle was the first person
Mhm.
that says like, hey, look at any race, any 5K or 10K or whatever you want to say. It's not just about getting people to the start line. It's about where there's money. The running industry is made of
Ex-
money. It's
Exactly.
what about that for like, that's what running industry diversity coalition is about. I mean, it's about many things, but it's also about making sure that the industry um,
Exactly.
is different and better.
Exactly. When you think at who are the CEOs, who's in the C-suite, who owns retail stores, it's all for the most part, it's white men,
Mhm.
older white men, men who participated in the running boom, like Chris, like JB, right? And so when all of that wealth and decision-making power is concentrated in the same hands,
Mhm.
you're not, first of all, you're not able to get diverse representation, right?
Mhm.
Like you're speaking to the same audience.
Mhm.
And to Chris's credit, he really is interested in investing in creating new leadership. Like
Very
I have
much
so
so.
many friends who look at Chris as a mentor who gives advice, really breaks down some career advice that you wouldn't just get from anybody, right? But Chris has such a deep belief, and that's what we want to model in this industry, that in order for the running community to truly be diverse, the industry also has to match that.
Mhm.
And we need more empowered leaders who look like us.
Yeah, and I don't want to not make this about Chris. I actually had
I
Chris.
know. Hi, Chris. We
Hi,
love
Chris. How
you.
you doing? I had Chris on the show. I'm a ambassador for Gazelle, so like
Yeah.
when I first met him, I definitely was like, I thought that like I'm like, okay, here we go. Like a guy who's like, it was like 2021, and I'm like, okay, I
Yeah.
guess, you know what I mean? But then like how passionate he and the people involved in RIDC
Yeah.
really are
Yeah.
in like making lasting change, and without like something like that that has the right is in it for the right reason.
Mhm.
Companies that are majority white at the top
Mhm.
levels can only naturally just go the way that they were going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's only so much you can do as a white CEO with a white staff that's in the boardroom with you. Like, where can you go from there?
Right. I mean, and the thing is that just a big part of it. And I always, when people say like, what's one takeaway? I say truly that awareness piece, because for many, many years, all of these conferences, all of these boardrooms have been all white and mostly male. And nobody has really batted an eye, right?
Yeah,
Nobody has thought, wow, that's really strange. The population, like in this room, doesn't reflect the national demographics, right? Like
yeah,
people have not wondered or thought there was a problem with it.
yeah.
So training white people in awareness is a critical piece of that. And then with that awareness, what are you going to do about it? Right?
Mhm,
What are the ways that you're going to make places more interesting and attractive for Black people so that you can retain talent? What are ways that you're going to not just hire low level people? There's
mhm,
this really great quote that if your job or space mirrors a plantation, you're doing it wrong, right? If all the power is concentrated at the top and all the racial diversity is in the lower level positions, you're doing it wrong. But
mhm.
it has to start with awareness.
Yeah. And so like what for someone that's like, just say for me, if I haven't picked up the book yet, yeah, black guy in the running world, what do you it's easy to hear some of the stories that we've all experienced and feel anger.
Mhm.
And you mentioned something, you mentioned in the book, like, do you hate white people or do you hate the system that's there?
Mhm.
What is your advice to someone that's picking up this book to make sure that they hear what you are saying and not like what you're reminding us of what happened?
Mhm. I mean, I think like what I was really intentional in this book, that I also shared just how beautiful running is and that
Mhm.
running saved my life. And I think this is a running book, but it's actually a book for anybody who's ever felt like they were on the margins or felt powerless or felt like they didn't have a community and were longing for that. So in this book, you learn about the joy of moving your body, of realizing that you're more powerful than you ever knew, of trying new things, of meeting new people, of finding love and community, right? Like all of that is in this. Um, but alongside the reality that we live in as Black people. And then there's some really fun surprises history wise, where you learn
Yeah.
that the modern running as we know it, the New York City Marathon, all of that was created by us. Like we
Yeah.
are actually central in this story. Yes, New
Yeah.
York Pioneer Club. So it is a reminder of the fact that Black people make a way out of no way,
Mhm.
that we are integral to this sport that we love, and that we all need to know that. We all need to know that history, and we need to share it with people. So there's something in my book for everyone.
And I really do like that. Like you just reminding me of like the that part of it and about how it was perceived that like running was started. Running in America was started in Oregon, but
Mm,
there's people doing the same exact thing. They just happen to look like us and don't get much credit for it at all.
mm,
I love like the title of the book is Running While Black. Living in a sport that isn't made for us, but at the
mm.
same time it's like in the book you expose that it was, and we were
Exactly.
there. And I think that that's a really cool way, because like in history books, in growing up in school, you learn what's American history, and it's very often the black folks that are in it it's slave trade.
Exactly,
Cool.
which,
Yeah,
to be honest, like, slavery is as much, if not more, white history than black history, right?
right.
Like, this is white people's history, but it's somehow taught as only our history,
Yeah,
and that as if there's nothing to be proud of about our people and our culture
yeah,
within that time period,
yeah.
right?
Or since then. Yeah,
Or since then,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
When we know, I mean, just everything from the invention of peanuts
Yeah,
to modern running, were there
yeah.
creating the foundation.
And yeah, so I really encourage everyone to pick up a book, hard copy. I have mine right here. Or if you are like me and you just want to sit and do dishes or like whatever, stretch, foam roll, whatever,
Yes.
the audio book. And like I said in the beginning of this, Allison's voice is like pure butter. So you're
Thank you.
I'm just joking because you said that in the
I
book.
know, I know. Because I
um,
grew up, like, we that's the thing, like, we were talking about hair.
yeah,
Growing up, you just learn to hate things about yourself for no reason. I don't
no
know
reason.
why I started hating my voice. I don't know when I first thought, like, wow, I hate the sound of my voice. But then in recording this book, I was like, my voice is
Hey,
better. Are you
yeah,
kidding? Like,
yeah,
I could do this all day. So that's a piece of it too. Questioning these ideas about, like, who we should be, what we should look like, what's right, what's wrong. All of that is part of this journey.
yeah. And then in this book is not for just for black folks. This is for everyone.
This is for everyone. I think for Black folks, and marginalized folks, so anybody who is not cis het white, they'll find themselves in this book. I was talking to Shireen, who's one of the women of Burn It Down Pod. She is a Muslim woman. She's covered, and she's not a runner, but she saw herself in the writing as somebody who has been marginalized.
Hmm.
And then for white folks, yeah, you'll learn. One, you'll learn about our experiences as Black people moving through space, and like I said, you'll feel energized to do something about it.
Yeah, and I like and one of the things that I got from the book was I really enjoyed your the journey, especially about you start in Harlem Run Club, and like that moment of like you feeling like maybe the other folks of color, the men of color,
Mhm.
should have or could have been more supportive in that moment, but just the structure of like how
Mm,
things work, black women are at the bottom of this whole thing.
mhm,
And I just loved how you said, forget that. I'm just gonna continue to do what I think is right for you,
mhm.
for you in the group that you're trying to support. And that just kind of reminded me that whoever's out there, you're making content or doing podcasts or whatever it is, do just do you.
Yeah.
And no matter, and I think T Davis said said that it's also more important that black groups stay black and
Mm,
not try to be too inclusive, and start catering to the point where we lose ourselves, because in order to like thrive or live in this world, typically we feel like we have to bend or fold or change
mm,
the way we talk or
mm,
something to
mhm,
make it more like palatable
mm,
for white folks or people in power.
mhm.
And I just love that you said forget everybody in power, and you just continue to show up the way you needed to show up. But the cool thing
Exactly.
about it is there's other people like you, no matter whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, I mean, we shortchange ourselves when we wait for other people to validate us or wait for somebody else to co-sign or
Mhm.
support, right? I think I knew just how important what I was building was. I knew how running had changed my life, and I knew that I needed to stick with this, and one day I wouldn't be alone
Mhm.
out there on
Yeah.
125th.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, you stuck with it, and I'm glad your mom just said, "Hey, no, no, you're doing this. It's important." We all need those moms that, like, no matter
Shout
what,
out
believe
to
in us.
moms.
Shout out to moms. Thank you. My mom's watching this, so shout out to moms. Yeah,
I
give me
love it.
some. But honestly, like I didn't know what I wanted to ask you, and I
Mhm.
wrote down a bunch of stuff just because I mean the book is so full. It's hard to listen to or read a book that like every word is like, well, that's it. Yep, yep, yeah. And it's like I don't know what to ask you now because I feel like I read my story, but
Mhm.
from your vantage point, and it's just a beautiful book, and I feel like everyone needs to get their hands on it or ears on it, whatever, listen, read because it's so needed, especially right now. And because you see brands like, and I look at Instagram differently than I used to. Like I look at Instagram, and if a brand says something or likes something, I'll look at their account and see like how far do I have to scroll to to
Mhm.
feel comfortable,
Mhm.
or see something that and I just feel like now is the time where we have to continue to not educate, but
Mhm.
like apply pressure and
Love
like
it.
inform, I guess.
Well, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I can't wait to meet you in person. It's just like I said, I love how you show up and all of the things that you're doing, and I'm here to support. Right, like we all need to have each other's back. We don't all need to like each other, but we
Yeah.
all need to recognize how critical it is that we support each other
Yeah.
because a rising tide lifts all boats.
I like that. Well, I'll let it end because I can't end it any better than that. Like I said, everybody get the book. Thank you so much, Allison. Where can people find you if they don't know?
Yeah. Alison, M as in Mary, Désir is my Instagram. That's my website, AlisonMDésir.com. You can find Running While Black by literally Googling Running While Black,
Just
Alison
Google it.
Désir. Buy it. And then please leave a review. If you love it, leave a review. That's how like algorithms work. The more reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, the more people will see my book. So let's make this thing a bestseller. And I can't wait to hear what you think about it.
All right. Thank you so much, guys, and everyone who's listening to this. I normally say run, eat, sleep, repeat, but go get the book.
Yes.
Thank you.